Under the burnished sky of late summer, the prairie seemed endless, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The air shimmered with heat, and the horizon dissolved into a haze of ochre and violet. On that narrow trail cutting through dust and stone, Naya walked with the measured steps of someone carrying more than her own weight. Two small children clung to her skirts, their small legs struggling to match her stride, their shadows long and wavering in the dying light. She whispered to them in the soft tones of her mother tongue, urging them onward with promises of rest. The boy, Koa, did not complain, his jaw set in quiet resolve, while Alona asked with wide eyes if the sky always burned before nightfall. Naya did not answer, for her throat ached with both thirst and something sharper, the shame of too many rejections echoing behind her. She had been called beautiful. Men in both the settlement and the scattered camps of her people had told her so. Yet the same men turned cold when they saw the children at her side. She had borne them young, before her heart had learned caution, and since then the world had branded her as ruined. No suitor wanted a woman who already carried two small mouths to feed. No household wanted her labor if it meant taking in those twins too. Each knock on a stranger's door ended with a shake of the head, each hopeful glance at a man's eyes ended with dismissal. She was 23, but weariness carved shadows beneath her cheekbones, and loneliness traced itself like an invisible brand upon her skin. Now her last chance stood before her. A ranch house alone on the prairie, the fencing straight and strong, the barn doors wide, the scent of horse and hay drifting even this far out. It was the land of Amos Cutter, the wealthy rancher whose name carried both envy and mystery. He was 30, unmarried and whispered about in town, handsome yes, but too proud, too hard, too solitary. Some said he had lost his kin to raids near the border. Others claimed he simply had no need for anyone. Naya knew little of the truth, only that his ranch was said to be vast and his pockets deep. She hesitated at the porch, her children pressing close to her legs. Her hand hovered, trembling, before the rough wood of the door. The silence of the prairie deepened, as if the land itself were listening. She feared the knock would bring another refusal, another tightening in her chest, another lesson that she and her children were unwelcome. Still, the dusk was settling fast and the little ones were too tired to walk farther. She breathed once, twice, then knocked softly. The door creaked open. Amos stood in its frame, the lamplight behind him cutting his figure into shadow and gold. His hair was dark, his face sun-worn, his eyes steady as a rider's hand on the reins. "You said nothing at first." Naya lowered her gaze, her voice roughened by dust. She asked not for charity but for work, any labor she could do in exchange for a corner to sleep in. Her children clung tighter, their faces half hidden. The paws stretched long, heavy as a storm cloud. Amos's eyes moved from her face to the children, then back again. Naya's stomach tightened, she knew this silence. She braced herself for the words she had come to expect. She shifted her weight, ready to turn away before the blow could land. But instead, Amos spoke quietly, his voice steady as the earth beneath their feet. "Come in. The night's no place for little ones." Her head lifted in disbelief, her breath catching. He did not smile, yet his hand opened the door wider, the gesture simple but carrying more mercy than she had known in years. The children looked to her, their eyes searching. With a slow nod, she guided them inside. The warmth of the room enveloped them, the crackle of a fire, the scent of stew lingering from supper, the solid walls that promised shelter. Naya felt her knees nearly give, but she steadied herself. She would not appear weak before this man. Amos gestured toward the table, offered water, and set down bread. His movements were measured, unhurried, as if he were used to silence as his only companion. The children ate greedily, crumbs scattering, their little hands clumsy in their hunger. Naya sat rigid, watching Amos as if waiting for him to change his mind. He asked no questions, only observed with an expression that was neither pity nor disdain. That night he gave them blankets and a space in the loft. Naya lay awake, the children curled beside her, listening to the low sounds of the ranch house settling into night. She could not fathom why he had allowed them in when so many had turned them away. The weight of suspicion pressed on her chest, but beneath it flickered a fragile ember of something she had not let herself feel in years: hope. Days passed and Amos kept his word. He set her small tasks, mending tack, tending to the garden, helping with the hens. It was work she knew well and she performed it without complaint. The children found joy in the wide spaces of the ranch. Alona laughed as she chased grasshoppers, her braids flying, while Koa followed Amos at a distance, watching the cattle with solemn curiosity. Amos said little but his actions spoke. When he saw the children eyeing the horses with awe, He built them a wooden toy horse from spare pieces of lumber, leaving it by the door without acknowledgement. When Naya's thread broke as she worked on a bridle, he wordlessly handed her another spool. She noticed the calluses on his hands, the careful way he set tools down, the silence that was not coldness but something deeper, perhaps a loneliness that matched her own. Yet even as comfort grew, the outside world intruded. In town, whispers spread quickly. Naya felt the sting of eyes upon her when she came for supplies, the curled lips of women who whispered that Amos had taken in a fallen girl, and her half-wild twins. Men muttered that Amos was a fool, that she would bring him nothing but trouble. Naya's spine stiffened as she heard the words, but at night, when the house was still, she wondered if those voices would soon echo in Amos's heart. One evening a storm rolled in, the sky bruised with thunder. Rain battered the windows and the children trembled at the roar. Naya drew them close, singing softly in Apache, the melody low and steady like a heartbeat. From the doorway, Amos watched her, the lamplight painting her face in gold and shadow. Her song stilled the children's fear, and something within Amos shifted, though he said nothing. The next morning, when the fences had been torn by the storm, Naya pulled on her shawl and worked beside him, sleeves soaked, mud streaked across her cheeks. She did not shrink from the labor. Amos glanced at her more than once, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. That night, as the fire burned low, Amos broke his silence. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. He said he did not see her as a burden. He admitted that the ranch, for all its wealth and expanse, was hollow without voices to fill it. He spoke of the ache of solitude, of kin lost and years spent listening only to wind and hoofbeats. Naya's breath caught, her eyes burning, for the truth in his words struck the same wound she carried. She did not answer, but her silence was not rejection, it was the careful guarding of a hope too fragile to name. The moment of test came swiftly. A neighbor, sharp-eyed and bitter, rode up one morning, spitting insults that cut like blades. He sneered at Naya, called her shame by name, warned Amos that she and her children would stain his good standing. Amos stood still, his jaw set. The air grew taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, with quiet finality, Amos said the words that changed everything, "I choose them." Naya froze. She had never been chosen, not as a woman, not as a mother, not as someone worthy of standing beside another. Her chest heaved as the neighbor rode away, his curses fading into the distance. Alona clutched her mother's skirt, while Koa pressed himself to Amos's leg. Amos did not step back, instead he bent down and gathered both children in his arms. They clung to him, and in that simple gesture, something inside Naya broke open and began to heal. Weeks later, beneath the vast prairie sky, Naya and Amos stood side by side as husband and wife. There was no grand ceremony, no crowd to witness, only the endless land, the children's laughter, and the promise of a new beginning rooted not in lightning-strike passion but in steady, enduring choice. Their days were still marked by toil, but the ranch rang with life. And when Naya looked at Amos in the quiet hours of evening, she saw not only the man who had opened his door, but the man who had looked at her shame and transformed it into belonging. Perhaps, dear listener, that is the lesson to carry. The world may cast us aside, whisper that we are less, but sometimes all it takes is one soul steady enough to choose us as we are. And in that choosing, dignity returns, and love grows like wildflowers after rain.